So I want to talk about Mozilla Solo. I'm sure many have heard about it. I'll give you a little bit of background before I jump into it. So I've been to a few of these events in the past. I know, although there's marketers in this room, there's a lot of people here building startups. And so I wanted to not only kind of talk about AI website building, I'm sure you've seen that, but really talk about the journey on how we built Solo at Mozilla. And I thought you'd find this interesting because I feel in a startup, there's a lot of things you take for granted. It's harder in many ways, but it's easier in many ways. And when you're building in a large company, there's a whole different set of challenges. So I was just going to share some of that. So that's kind of my outline today. I'm going to go through a quick demo. I'll share what the journey looked like. And then depending on where we are in time, because I do have quite a bit, I pulled all these slides together literally earlier today. So it's a little bit of a mix of styles, and you'll see that because I was cutting and pasting from different presentations. But depending on how much time we have, we can even jump into some of the things that we've learned technically using generative AI and whatnot. So I wanted to start off with just a quick demo. So Solo is, this is our internal staging site, but you can visit at soloist.ai. The goal was very simple. Wanted to build an AI website creator, but for service providers. And so the thinking there was that Wix and Squarespace, they're your sort of general purpose website construction tools, WordPress, Wix, Squarespace, whatnot, Shopify, that sort of e-commerce. But we recognize that the side hustle, and it turns out to be supported by data, is the fastest growing business in the US. People want to be their own boss. Everybody's got something that they're really passionate about that they want to build with. So very simply, and I'm sure you've seen experiences like this, about 50% of our users actually start with an existing web presence. So we did discover that the time at which somebody decides to build a website is often when they're ready to grow their business. So they're usually starting with either Thumbtack or Yelp or whatnot, but basically you just type what your business is about. And I'm just using an example I use often, and we're in whatever, we can just say SF. And we choose some font styles, you can adjust it, you can choose some color palettes, whatever sections, and then it generates your site. And so what's happening here behind the scenes is it's actually running a series of prompts. We use OpenAI to generate the content for each of those different sections. And then it gets populated into a template that we've created. Now, I'll go into more detail. How do we make it unique and how do we make it authentic and whatnot? But I just want to quickly finish the demo and I'll jump back to the slides and we'll jump into some of that. So as you can see, it's built, a first pass at a website, dog walking services, a little gallery, whatnot, sort of the basics of what you might need if you wanted to start a business. You could edit any of these sections. You could change images out. You can add more. Maybe you wanted an FAQ or customer reviews or whatever it might be. And neatly, you can actually connect your custom domain, and it's 100% free. As far as I know, I think it's the only place on the internet you can host and connect your custom domain for free. Part of Mozilla's sort of mission around democratizing the web. And so that's the basic gist of it, of what the sort of experience looks like. So I want to jump back to the slides and go into this journey. So why we built Solo. So I talked a little bit about the beginning. Most of my career has been startups. I actually landed at Mozilla through an acquisition. And there was a specific reason for the acquisition, but my role was sort of like, hey, Raj, can you come up with some new things that we should build? Pitch it and let's build it. And so I had pitched an AI website builder, but how I sort of got there was I started here. During the pandemic, my son was stuck at home, obviously with remote school and whatnot. He was 6. And so I taught him how to play chess. I wanted to coach other kids how to play chess. I went to Wix and WordPress. Those are sort of my defaults. And they're simple, but surprisingly complicated in a different way. Lots of choices in terms of design. You have to write the content, whatnot. It was trouble. So that was sort of one of the first areas my mind gravitated to when I joined Mozilla, was like, is there something we can do here? And started looking at the data, and it turns out, as I mentioned, side hustles are growing like immensely fast. But then the problem, as I pointed out earlier, the hard part when I was building my chess site, because I wanted to coach kids how to play chess for free, was drafting the content and curating the images. And surprisingly, this is one of those weird things, and we've seen it from our data, that more design choices is actually not better, it's worse. In some ways, you want to make decisions for you. Don't give me too many choices. I'm not that sophisticated, or not as sophisticated as I might think I am. And you help me sort of make those decisions, because most users just sort of churn at this point. And if you go and talk to WordPress or Wix, you'll see massive sort of churn rate in site construction. And so that was a sort of aha looking at the data. But the other thing is, and when we started this project, generative AI was this new thing. Now, I was fortunate, given that my previous lives have mostly been in the AI space. And so I always had this 95% rule, which was, we should expect that the results are going to be like 95% good, but like the 5% for mission critical stuff, probably not going to work. Will we get there? Maybe, but we haven't done it yet. And so the question I always ask myself is a 95% result good enough for that particular use case? So the example I often give, in my previous life, I had a calendar company. Calendly is the winner there when you had all these other tools that were trying to automate your event scheduling. But the problem is they were wrong 1-2% of the time, so you stopped using them and you went back to manual scheduling. And so that's the whole sort of nature of AI. And so this problem, because it's really about drafting content, 95% is totally sufficient, and it's still saving you a ton of time. This was like one of the early tables quadrants I had made internally. They're like, hey, Raj, website building, seriously? That's a super crowded space. Is this something you want to build? And I sort of drew this out. And what I was trying to show is a good insertion point, and I think about this a lot when I do startups, is trying to find something an incumbent's doing and then taking one piece of it and doing it like massively better. And so in this case, it was, at the time, Wix, GoDaddy, they had some workflows that were oriented around e-commerce construction, but they didn't really have anything for service providers, people who charge by the hour, whether you're a therapist, whether you're a coach, whether you're a tutor or whatnot. And then you had Shopify that really demonstrated that, hey, if we just focus on e-commerce, we could also be a multi-billion-dollar company. And so felt there was an opportunity here. And so this is what sort of helped drive some of the buy-in internally at Mozilla. And then, of course, I always start with what's the vision, or like, what's the big thing I want to accomplish here? And then you just narrow, right? And I think some people call that product editing. I know that's kind of a common term within sort of product management. So I drew this out, and this is like, what are all the different pain points we could help solopreneurs with? And it was this massive list of things. And of course, as I'm looking at this, I'm like, this is way too much. Like, how do we choose? Where do we start? So the process that I went through was, what do I think is a good entry point from which you could then branch into other things? And I wrong or right choice or whatnot, I concluded the website would have been a good entry point. So my next step was, let's go run a survey and see what are all the types of things people want on their website. And this is only showing the first 10 of about 40 or 50 sort of results. There's a lot of things people want on their website. So then the next step was, I went through all of these sort of different things, and I started intersecting what are the most common things, but what also would be the least amount of work to sort of get to market. Because your whole game here is you're within a larger company. It's not a startup. And so there is this thing I call a conviction window. And what I mean by that is, you have a sponsor or somebody who's supporting what you're working on, but there's like a period they're excited, but then the next shiny object comes along like 3 months later, and they want to work on the next thing. And so you have a very small time frame for which you got to move something forward. And, at this point, the team is basically myself. I'm just sort of alone. So we sort of intersected that, drew my first sketches. This is just my level of Figma fidelity. And then fast forward, and this is where we are here today, right? And so we kind of launched it in market as a beta in December earlier this year, and 1.0 on Product Hunt last month, or actually in June. I guess it's August now. And it's growing quickly, and it's become actually a case study sort of within Mozilla in terms of how to build a new product. So this is the high level of what that journey looked like. And part of this is I just really wanted to emphasize what the team looked like. It was super small. It was just myself. for a while, and then a half-time designer. This was just to help me better prototype and visualize. Then I had one engineer, and I actually spent last summer coding again, which is something I hadn't done in a while. ChatGPT, obviously enormously helpful during that process, so I'm kind of over here. We then expanded. We had our first version kind of released to the public in October timeframe. And then we had a little bit of an announcement in mid-December, which was a beta. And then our product hunt announcement, which just happened here in June. So that was kind of the journey on what that looks like. We still haven't done the official sort of Mozilla new product announcement that will happen soon, hopefully. But I just kind of wanted to show what this looked like. One of the things that's been interesting working on Solo and just sort of website construction authoring in general is what's an active user. So I've built a number of products through my career, and usually you look at retention, like do people come back? But the reality is most people build their sites and they never look at it again. They kind of publish it, they link it off their social media. The most traffic, one of the things I've learned here, the most traffic to a website is the website author himself. Just like the most traffic to your LinkedIn page is probably yourself. And so a LinkedIn profile, that is. And so we had to come up with some new definitions. So we use the term draft websites. These are people who created websites, but didn't publish them, people who published websites. But then we had to define what is an active website. And so we created a whole set of criteria there that you can see on the right. And then you can sort of see the sort of growth. So this is kind of till just early sort of July. This is when we made our product hunt announcement, which I think has helped with top the funnel and some domain authority, so getting a little bit more organic. But this is obviously something we're tracking. Now, what I map all of this to is just what is our funnel and what is our North Star metric. So ultimately, my goal is to drive more active websites. And so we have these percentages. I don't have baselines yet. This is all work in progress. We're only 4.5 people right now. So I'm doing a lot of this myself. ChatGPT has been amazing for BigQuery construction, where previously I would probably have to use a data scientist to help me with those sort of things. But this is, I just wanted to give people a perspective. Like these were things that we were thinking about from the onset. So what I learned building a new product in Mozilla, and I'm just going to check my time. Okay. One of the things that was challenging is there is a shiny object syndrome. And I think this is very common in larger companies. When you're in a startup, you maybe raise a seed round or whatnot. Now you've got 18, 24 months, you're on a treadmill. You don't really have the choice to go and just say, I'm going to hop over to another idea entirely. But a large company, it's really easy to do that. And it's really easy to have other leaders or colleagues come to you and say, hey, Raj, do you want to come work on this? Right in the middle of whatever you're building. And so it can be very distracting. So it's really important to have enough individual conviction around something to kind of just stick with it and ignore that sort of noise. Number two here, really around the tooling. So Mozilla, as you can imagine, has a bunch of enterprise licenses to all the sort of common set of tooling that they use to build Firefox and their other products. But a lot of those systems have tons of guardrails. They're not necessarily the fastest system to use if your goal is to kind of get to market. So ultimately, pretty quickly, I realized that I'm just going to start running everything on my own credit card. And that's what I did. Various tools. I decided to use Google Analytics when the company was using Amplitude. I decided to use it sort of goes on and on. OpenAI, when the company was evaluating, hey, we should be using open source AI only, things like that. And so that was something that I think looking back and reflecting really sort of important. Obviously, you don't necessarily have all these sort of privileges when you're building new within your organization, but things to think about. Number three, it's something I've learned just in startups. So when I hire for startups, I typically evaluate on competency, agency, and generalist. Those are sort of my three sort of criteria when I hire. And hiring generalists in a large company is non-trivial because usually you have lots and lots of specialists. We have an SEO specialist. We have a lifecycle marketer specialist who focuses on like email drip campaigns. We have paid acquisition specialist who focuses on paid. We have, you name it. Whereas in a startup, you're kind of doing all of those roles and you have a generalist that can sort of figure that out. So this was really important when I was thinking about how to pull my team together. Focus on generalists, people who aren't afraid of doing the grunt work and then wanting to outsource that to another specialist and then to another specialist and so forth. But it's easy to say these things, but it's hard to do in the moment. Number four, this is a super common challenge I've observed just sort of building new product in Mozilla. And I'm kind of sharing this from the perspective, I've been doing startups my whole career. I dropped out of master's and started my first company, and I've been through multiple acquisitions. but I don't stay at the acquiring company too long. I usually leave and take time off and then start my next thing. But I'm here at Mozilla building this. And so this is something new that I've seen. A lot of the decision-making in larger companies is consensus-driven. You're used to getting colleagues to agree and then you move forward, but that's too slow in a startup. You kind of have to make decisions even when you don't have consensus. The other thing, a lot of decisions are made with data. We don't have data when we're building from scratch. All those building startups right now are leading on intuition. Sometimes you have data, but you're like, you know what, we should just do this. If I had all the time and all the data, fine, but then I'm not going to be able to get that out within 12 months so I can show the milestones to go raise my next round of funding within 18 months when I run out of money. So you're truly running against a run out of money situation, but that's not the case in a larger company. So this is really against the nature of a lot of folks who are sort of trained within larger companies, which is something I've observed, which was important in sort of building Solo within Mozilla. And then number 5, there is this conviction window, as I called out earlier. So you have to optimize on speed. And what that really means is you just have to keep simplifying. And I think this is also true within startups, so I don't think this is any different. But I shared a little bit about the journey on how we narrowed in going 0 to 1. So let me just time check here. Okay, so I can keep going. I hope this is interesting because I know I'm not just talking about how to use website building for AI marketing, which I think is obvious. So there was some interesting things we learned in using generative AI. And at this point, I feel probably most of the developers are going to see this and just sort of nod their head, but I'll kind of run through it really quickly. So we started our experiments with ChatGPT. So now this is sort of going back 12 to 15 months when we're initially doing these experiments. We actually started with one massive prompt. So the way the website is sort of constructed, if I kind of go back, each of these sections is actually different text generation. So they're actually different prompts. So we actually started with one prompt to kind of generate the text for every section. And the images here are all sourced from Unsplash, which has a whole bunch of Creative Commonsly publicly available images that we could use. And that didn't work for a variety of reasons. And so we ultimately multi-threaded our fetches for each of those different sections. I think today it might be better, but there were some challenges at the time, but we have not yet tried. The goal here was to make sure we could get some consistent text that was sort of creative, authentic to what you were trying to build. One of the challenges here was it felt feeling too redundant. So how do we make it sort of feel authentic? What is the right amount of variability? We just chose a random temperature of 0.7. Don't know if it's right or wrong. We haven't played with it. I actually played with a bunch of tools at the time that would actually cluster the responses. So you could look at them in a graph and you can see different clusters. And so you could do comparisons and they'd run similarity. And then you could try to figure out okay, how good is this response or is that in another response? But in very sort of startup mindset, that's research and we don't have time for that. We got to go forward. And so kind of tabled all of that work. And I hope the Mozilla Foundation is doing actual work around that. And they're going to come back and inform us and sort of Mozilla AI and the other groups within Mozilla. But we didn't have time to sort of further that exploration. We did learn some interesting things. At the end of the day, it's generating the text, but it's not generating your style. Curating colors from ChatGPT is really an average of the internet. So we ultimately created the color palettes ourselves, and we had to pick them based on light mode and dark mode. There's a lot of permutations you have to deal with there. We ultimately curated the fonts ourselves. And we thought the whole world shouldn't look like sans serif and shouldn't look like, the same sort of 5 fonts that ChatGPT would regularly recommend. And so there was areas where we felt like when it came to style and judgment, it wasn't the best choice. But there were areas where it excelled, which was really around text generation. The other thing you noticed is we do start with the scrape. You can scrape your current site. This has been an area where I think we want to invest more energy. About half the sites start with an existing site. The challenge here we found is the AI is getting better at using that scraped data. It does hallucinate. It'll hallucinate reviews, which weren't even there. I'm like, where did this come from? But the challenge there actually is, I think, in this sort of, and I'm calling it Web 3 era, which is the anti-Web 2 era, where nothing is open and everything is closed. Every service is trying to block scraping now, right? So if you're people are starting with their Instagram page, it's impossible to scrape, or it's difficult. If you're starting with your Facebook page, whatnot. So that's really sort of the new challenge here in an area we have more time to look at now, so that we're looking at. Getting structured output. I'm going to move a little bit faster just because of time. Getting structured output. This has been a challenge that's mostly been solved, but this was very much a challenge at the onset. So if you just wanted JSON output. Abuse scenario. So we have found OpenAI's model to be great, like very guardrailed. Like you could put in there, I want to do gun something XYZ, whatever, and it will come back and say, for gun coaching, these, like, so it kind of takes even the most nefarious sort of occupations, like I want to be an assassin, and it will spin it into something positive, or more positive, I should say. So that's great. However, because we are, I think, the only place where you can host and connect your custom domain for free, we've encountered a whole new set of abuse scenarios where people are starting to use this to domain host, like basically host their domains. They're domain squatters. They have hundreds of domains. We're starting to see spammy referral sites. We addressed that by adding the no refer tag to all the anchor tags on the page, so you don't get to juice any domain authority off of us. Hot linking, people uploading images to us and then just sort of linking to the image. We actually disabled that. So little things that we've done. I'm sure Tumblr dealt with a lot of this back in the day. They're the last big one I thought of that allowed hosting a custom domain for free. But these are things we're working through. There were some challenges around choosing images. Dolly, not ready yet. We are thinking about using some of it for abstract images and background images. I'm going to keep going here just because of time. I want to make sure there's time for questions. Our approach for making things unique is we basically coded a range of different layouts and then we randomize. So we randomize whether this one has a border color or not, whether this one has a separator line, whether this is a circular versus a square frame. And so it does feel unique, and you can actually in Solo create multiple sites. You can come here and you can go and create another site. And so you can actually kind of see and play with that if you want to play with that. I'm going to keep going. We talked about 95%. I just want to see what else I can share here. There are some interesting things we did learn from our users. So starting at number 3 first, Mozilla's footprint is like massive. They're everywhere. Although Mozilla hasn't really promoted us in that way yet, you won't find us off their corporate homepage. And we kind of run on the Solo site. I think just drafting off Mozilla, our traffic is literally all over the world. We have sites created everywhere. It's amazing. I actually do go look at some of these sites. I saw an Airbnb site in a really middle of nowhere place in Russia, and I was just looking at the cabins in the picture that they had in their gallery. I'm like, really fascinating, like what it would be like to stay there. Users are building. The other thing we've seen is users are building all kinds of sites, even though we positioned this for service providers. We're staying focused there because I think it's important to position. But they're building all kinds of things, personal homepages, business sites, things that we didn't expect. But the other thing that's been interesting is people really spend time making it their own. They want it to be perfect. It's vanity, it's their business, it's their brand. We are so careful about not trying to make the experience complicated. We look at an editing tool, somebody might say, and like, do we really need to add that editing capability? It's more about simplicity here. If you want the whole enchilada, go use Wix or Squarespace or WordPress. That's what they're for. So there is that sort of constant balance. In terms of what's next, our strategy is we want to Robin Hood this space. So you got to figure out a way to disrupt. And we're underpowered. We have less people, less budget. We're a very small team. We're coming in late. And we're doing that by making something that's traditionally paid free. So I like to say we're democratizing the internet. That's sort of Mozilla's key message. But the other thing too is, and this was very clear early on, people are creating their websites because they want to grow their business. Mozilla actually has an ad network a lot of people don't know about, which is within Firefox. Our plan over the next 1 to 2 years is to allow you to purchase ads against the Mozilla Ad Network, which would be cheaper than Google. So when somebody searches for plumbers in San Jose, it could run your Solo website against that search because it's all house inventory to us, so we can undercut Google. It's super targeted, and I think it's a great way to create a win-win situation, and it's a free way for you to start your business without having to pay for a custom domain and all of the shady things those sites do to try to upsell you $10 here and $10 there. It's really, really annoying. So that's the gist of the conversation. More about me there. I think we have 5 minutes for questions. We've had a couple requests for more customization there, but have decided not to support that yet. You can change individual colors within the different sections from the palette, but mostly because we think the majority of users, we're targeting the 95%. And we think the majority of users actually don't have a good design aesthetic. And we have determined that the process of choosing colors is actually a high point of churn in website construction because you're never satisfied with your color choices. Not at this time. And I think part of the reason for that is our goal is to make it a business for Mozilla. And so our hook is to provide hosting of your custom domain for free. And then, and the irony here, just to be clear, just an interesting insight here. In many ways, we're going after the high margin business of Wix and Squarespace. So if you look at their customer base, they've got a ton of customers that get 10 visits a month. Most restaurant and service provider businesses don't get that much traffic, but they're paying $10 to $50 to $100 a month because of all of these shady upsells. And that's their high margin customers. They don't make as much money on the high bandwidth customers. We actually ran the ops internally, like the OpEx. We can host 50 to 100,000 websites for less than $100 a month to us, because that's how cheap bandwidth has become. And the other trend is SSL certificates are free today. So these models are based on like legacy business models of like 20 years ago. And that's why I really feel it's an opportunity to Robin Hood the space. We have a contact form that's built in. We have thought about allowing you to export, if you wanted like a CSV export of everybody who's contacted your business. You can customize this a little bit. We've explored integrating a chat widget sort of functionality through custom code. We haven't done that yet. There hasn't been enough requests for it, and I'm really constantly like, is this adding complexity? How many people actually are going to use this? Naturally, there is a line, right? There's a line at which you want a lot of control and customization of your website. In that case, you should go to Wix and Squarespace, right? But the vast majority of people doing freelance side hustle, they need something really, really simple. And so that is something we've been balancing. Yeah, right. Yeah. So you basically, I just opened up the contact us section for this website that I had created about dog walking. And so you can just set the email address. And then when anyone submits, so I'll go ahead and just to show you for kicks. So I'm just going to publish this site. There you go, right? So I've just published this website. So now a customer visits your website, they can type in their email and whatever. And then when they hit contact, you'll receive an email. You can do it that way. It's better to do it this way. Actually run through this Connect domain flow we have.
Okay.
And then this is actually something I'm really proud of. We actually partnered with the company. I'm just gonna just whatever. It doesn't matter actually. I'm just gonna type in a domain. What you can do is you can actually log in through this. And it will do all the DNS configuration for you.
Cool.
So it's like one click. You can configure your Google Analytics here. So you just click configure here. There's a help article we have on how to set it up in GA, and then you just give us the GA ID, and then you have analytics on your page. If you look at history of things I've built in the past, some of them were going into a category where, like, why are there 100 calendar apps, but I think they all suck? Can we build a better experience, right? Or in some instances, why I can't get a summary of my meeting. So common now, but that was what my previous startup was, which is what Mozilla acquired. You're right. When I'm doing my own startups, I start with like a personal pain point that I want to solve. And sometimes you're category pioneering, maybe is the word to use. Or sometimes you're kind of drafting into an existing space. Building in Mozilla is a little bit different. I have other things I need to consider. And so the biggest of which is time and that conviction window. And I could be wrong on this, but I feel the expectation for results is so fast that I have to take a lower risk approach. And so I self-selected ideas that were more in existing categories known to be working, and then sort of applied, is there an insertion point, and can I draft off Mozilla? It's not, I didn't entirely land on this just because I wanted to build this. I knew websites and that whole world is something that's of interest to Mozilla too. Mozilla is known for that because of Firefox, right? So there was more calculation in how I landed at a particular idea. If I was not at Mozilla, would I be building this on the side? Probably not. I have other ideas that I've thought about. But you kind of, this is part of the learning I went through just sort of building in a larger company, 0 to 1.